The Bliss Business Podcast, the show about empathy, connection, and consciousness in business. Today's episode is brought to you by Zero Company, your paid search, social media, and programmatic ad experts.
Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Stephen Sakach. We've got Tullio, Siragusa, and Maher with us again. Today, we are going to dive into the Cheerleader's Guide to Corporate Success, or rather the power of positive empathy in the workplace. Imagine making work a little less like work and a whole lot more fun and meaningful. I think for 95% of you out there, maybe a little less. I think that sounds like an impossible thing. I know how we're all feeling it sometimes. But when you start stacking up little changes on top of little changes at the workplace to improve culture and the environment, you can make it happen. So how do we build the feel-good factory? Well, check out these podcasts, of course. Share them with your colleagues. The goal of these podcasts is to help you build a more authentic, loving company. And yes, it's important to do because it's the right thing to do. It's the future of business, but also it pays off. I mean, the holy grail of marketing is when you have people who genuinely love what they do, care about their customers and the organization, and where your customers love you so much that they actually do the marketing for you. So if you're in marketing or sales out there, know that these topics aren't just about building company culture or personal development. They are to level up your company in a way that few have mastered. And that's why this is the Bliss Business Podcast, where we help you build love into scalable systems. So in the last show, we talked about the importance of empathetic leadership. And when we think of empathy, I think the first thing that comes to mind for most people is feeling someone else's pain. But there are two sides to this coin. Why not feel and share in the joy of others as well, right? That's what positive empathy is. It's about this other side of empathy that is typically ignored. So when we talk about positive empathy, it refers to this ability to share and understand and respond to the positive emotions of others. It leads to increased connection, joy, and this mutual well-being. And it goes beyond just merely recognizing someone's happiness. It actually involves participating in their joy or success. So when we share some personal achievement going beyond, if Ash tells me something that just great that happened and me just saying congrats, and going on to my next thing, actually just celebrating that experience with him. Or, even if we're going through some sort of personal growth, sharing those milestones with others, let them be the cheerleader along with you on that ride. So putting a little energy in this direction toward positive empathy, I think, is a great way to really develop that deeper connection with people. Ash and Tullio, I want to start out with a question. So Tullio, outside of your marriage or the birth of your kids, tell me about one of your top 20 days ever.
Oh, good one. I think one related to work was in 2005. When one of the investors of the company I was head of sales and marketing with came to me and said, I'd like to see if we can take the experience you've had working with Facebook and YouTube. At the time, I was instrumental in helping those two companies monetize their traffic. This was before they became as big as they were. And so I was part of a team that helped them do that and learned a lot about the future of social media and how it could introduce contextual analytics and things of that sort. And it was exciting to be recognized by someone where they were like, we should start a company. We'd like you to be the founder and CEO. And just to get validated that way was incredibly, it tickled me. I was like, me? I'm just a, kid of a farmer. I grew up in small town in Europe. I'm not some tech CEO. And so it was just, my first glimpse really in seeing myself through the eyes of someone else who had seen my progression and the work that I had done and who believed in me. And it really tickled me. It made me want to believe in myself a little bit more as well. So it was a happy moment to have someone show belief in me and yourself, and very empowering. And I thought it was a great example of positive empathy.
I have to echo. Go, man. I was going to echo Tullio and what he shared, because that feeling of feeling appreciated for doing something that was super challenging, and then having someone actually be there to see the process, and then when you see the result and you're sharing that excitement together. I have a similar story. Mine was the first pivot into actually getting results for a client. And before that, it was me actually starving and hoping that someone would give me an opportunity. And this is one of those where it was like, we had that conversation. Hey, Ash, if you could pull this off, then I will help you achieve X, Y, and Z. Well, when that time came through the trials and tribulations, the challenges, the unforeseen circumstances, so on and so forth, for me to get that call Friday evening, I'll never forget. And he's ecstatic that he got his first few leads from online, and that this is going to play a huge part of his growth of his business. That acknowledgement of him looking at me and saying, hey, Ash, you did a good job. Thank you. Not having that before, and now actually being able to believe in myself because I have something tangible, and it came from feedback from someone that I respected and worked really hard to achieve that result for. That positive empathy, where he knew what I went through to get there, and he acknowledged it with an appreciation, really meant a lot to me. And that was one of my top 20 best days.
Yeah, I love that you guys shared that. And they're both sort of these work-related ones too, which I wasn't expecting. I was thinking even a personal related one, but both. I mean, in that work environment, your head is down, you're pounding all the time, right? And then suddenly someone says, hey, you're actually great, for a second. And then for me, just hear the story right now, to empathize with you guys, to be in that spot where it's like, you're feeling that for once, instead of just the constant work grind that it can be. I think, what I love about that question, and I've asked it in all kinds of places, you could be sitting in a 45-minute Uber drive and talking about nothing. And then it's like, you know what, I'm going to tweak this Uber driver just a little bit, and go there with something like that. And it's really a sneaky question sometimes too, because I've had relatives who are just, not very emotionally connected. And sometimes I'll just throw this into the conversation, and really for the first time seeing them get a little bit emotional about something that happened to them, 50 years ago, even, a long time ago. And it's like this great moment where we can connect. And they've even said later, hey, that was a great conversation. I really appreciate it. And you're just, like not expecting sometimes to get that from certain people, but that question, it's sneaky, and it goes in there and sneaks up on people when they're answering it, because you're thinking back to a moment like that where, yeah, you've been struggling. You guys have been working hard, and all of a sudden someone just said something, nice about you that just snapped you out of, the grind.
Yeah.
So, yeah, no, I love that both of you had that same sort of comment there. So, and I left this question off our podcast on small talk, but it's a good question for small talk because, I knew we were going to do this one down the line, but this is also just a good question to throw in there when you're just sitting around, and twiddling your thumbs or something.
It's a great question. Immediately puts you in this mindset of gratitude, because if you're being asked to remember something that's worthwhile celebrating, you can't help but feel a sense of gratitude in that moment. It can totally shift an entire conversation and open up for even more conversation. So kudos. It's a really great question. I'm taking that question from you. I'm going to use it.
Yeah, go for it. Use it. There's a lot of different circumstances where I've used it. I don't know how many years I've been doing it, like 10 years or something. And I guarantee you, I think I remember every single person's answer that I've done it to. Somehow it just sticks too. And so, I may not even remember a name, but I do remember like this story, and just being there with them in that moment and thinking about it. Inevitably, sometimes they'll ask me, hey, tell me about one of your days. And I'm like, wait a minute, I'm still in that space where you were a little bit. That was awesome. So guys, let's talk about why diving into this positive empathy is important. Ash, what's important about this? What's the research around it?
Okay, so I'm going to break down there was so much data points on the positive benefits of positive empathy in business, right? Just a couple things I'm going to read off to you guys, and all of these sources can be found in the comment section for the audience as well. But just right off the bat, the first two, when we talk about innovation and creativity, empathy is a number one rule for new product innovation and success. Okay. This was a study according to Nielsen analysis of 61,000 SKUs, representing more than 12,000 new launches since 2011. 3 in 4 launches fail within a year. Those that succeeded focus on walking in the shoes of the consumer to uncover key demand-driven insights. A second one, empathy boosts business creativity. Now, this one was interesting. In a scientific experiment with 209 adults, a simple empathy exercise designed to activate empathy boosted the creativity of participants who were innovating a new line of potato chips for pregnant women. Before beginning, some participants were asked to imagine how a consumer would feel using the product, while others were asked to imagine what the consumer would think when using the product. An independent jury found the ideas of the empathy-activated group were more original than the control group. Another one, empathy improves satisfaction. Now, what was interesting about this study was done in Korea, and it was focused around patients in the healthcare sector. But let's just replace patient with employee on this one when I'm reading it to you guys, okay? A Korean study in the healthcare sector found that empathy improves patient satisfaction and compliance. Compliance meaning adhering to treatment schedule. 550 outpatient participated in the study. Physician empathy levels were linked to better information exchange, perceived expertise, interpersonal trust, and partnership. That's what I mean. That was interesting, right? When I said you could replace patient with employee, right? Because all those things that we're trying to achieve within our internal organization are those there. The result. So this resulted in higher patient satisfaction and better compliance. Imagine better compliance of your employees and better employee satisfaction from empathy. Yeah.
I think too, in that healthcare setting, obviously empathy is like this big thing, but you can actually have empathy fatigue if you're dealing with all the pain and suffering in that. But, you could be helping someone too. And you could ask that question that I ask, just as a routine while you're going about your work. And suddenly you're out of the place where you get that empathy fatigue, where it's just bearing down on you. But you're in this different kind of the other side of the coin, right? You're in this positive empathy sort of place with someone. And then you're sharing this beautiful moment in their life. And they may be going through something traumatic at that time, or just something routine, but it's sort of flipping the table on what you normally have to do in that job.
No, absolutely. And these last 2 points, and there's so much more here. We're going to provide all the information, but the last 2 was empathy improves ability to negotiate. It might seem self-evident. I'm going to read this off directly from the article itself. It might seem self-evident that the ability to see things from the other side of a negotiating table is beneficial in negotiations. But an INSEAD experiment by Adam Galinsky and colleagues validated this scientifically. 146 negotiators were profiled for the empathetic ability of perspective taking, and this was found to predict negotiation success. Across 3 negotiations, empathetic perspective taking was linked to negotiators' ability to discover hidden agreements to both create and claim resources at the negotiation table. And then last one to wrap this all up, empathy is linked to good leadership. In studies by the Management Research Group, empathy was found to be the top competence for good leadership and one of the 3 strongest predictors of senior executive effectiveness. Similar results were found by the 2016 CCL analysis of 6,731 leaders from 38 countries, where enhanced empathy was linked to superior performance. And lastly, a recent DDI analysis of high-performance leadership with 15,000 business leaders confirmed the same link between empathy and leadership performance. More worrying was the finding that empathy remains low in business leaders, with only 40% having proficient empathy skills.
Not surprising.
Wow.
Yeah, it's not surprising. We talked about that last week. Some of the, if you missed that podcast, check out the empathetic leadership. And what's, I think, fascinating on some of this, though, is like negotiations. What you really want is this win-win scenario, right? So you do want some sort of positive outcome, especially, going forward. You don't want one side feeling like, a lot of times they say if both sides feel like they lost, then it's a good outcome. Maybe, but what about both sides feel like they win, right? That's the positive side of the empathetic approach there.
Yeah.
So Tullio, why do people struggle with being able to jump into the positive side of empathy?
I think, I actually did a research over a period of 10 years, 1,400 people. It was something I was going to present at a TEDx stage, and it's part of my 3rd book that I'm working on. It really comes down to the real worldwide epidemic, and that is the epidemic of low self-worth. It is so pervasive. Most people struggle with feeling like they're worthy or that they're good enough. And those who sometimes show up as if they're looking like they're good enough, sometimes they have imposter syndrome. So many things that go into feeling this sense of like up and down with your self-worth. And it's very externally driven for a lot of people. If my career is going well, then I feel good about myself. If my relationship's going well, then I feel good about myself. If this is not going well, then I don't feel good about myself. It's very externally driven. Only about 1 to 2% of people are completely internally driven, and no matter what's going on around them, they have reason to celebrate. And that's really what the main thrust of the hard time with showing positive empathy is, this idea that you should celebrate other people and you should celebrate yourself. And if you struggle with that, chances are there's some wounds, some trauma, some healing that you need to have, that you need to work through. And so often enough, we'll see someone who doesn't celebrate our wins, and the natural tendency to say, oh, Peter Betty over there, right? But the reality is that person is likely struggling being able to celebrate because they have something that they're not comfortable with within themselves. So, the best thing you can do is recognize it. If you find yourself not being able to celebrate other people's successes and wins, check in with yourself. There might be something that you're judging yourself for, that you're holding against yourself, and it's just manifesting in not being able to celebrate other people. And those usually are people who also have a hard time celebrating themselves. At least that's what my research has found. And there's other research you can look into that validates the same theory. But in my opinion, it really comes down to just feeling worthy, and celebrating yourself, even as imperfect or as flawed as we are, to still celebrate the small little wins we have along the way.
Yeah, I think there was, it might have been a Saturday Night Live skit. There was this character that was always like the topper, right? Like you say something great, they always had something that was trying to top that. And so, like you're saying, it's sort of this deep sense of probably insecurity to, not be able to celebrate what that person just said, that you've got to, prove yourself somehow better than that, rather than just sitting in that moment. Ash, what about you? What comes to mind?
So I have to, again, I'm going to use the word echo because I am echoing everything Tullio was saying. I agree with him. And I just want to add a little bit further. So for me, my perception is more so it's a deep-rooted biases that occur through indoctrination over years of how they've learned to do business, right? And then there's scenarios where there's projection that occurs. If they were someone that had to raise above through being more of a cutthroat in some fashion, where they weren't, it was their lone wolf approach to business and life that got them where they were at. So they think they have to stay that way. And if they're a cutthroat, then they're projecting that other people would also be cutthroat if they had to cut corners to get to where they need to get to. So again, it goes back into internal. But lastly, I think really once you determine it's a deep-rooted bias, or you're projecting based on how you may act or how you feel towards other people, and you think everyone's doing the same thing, I think the biggest challenge is fear of change. So I pulled some research on this as well. I found a LinkedIn article, and I found this really interesting. So if you have someone who is having a hard time seeing themselves and seeing that vulnerability to really reflect and be like, hey, you know what? There is a deep-seated issue going on. It has to do with my self-worth and so on. Well, that involves a level of change they have to bring into their lives. And these are the stats on change. So check this out. It says 1 in 3 people would avoid change if they could. According to the LinkedIn article, would you normally avoid change if you could? If you said yes, then you joined the 34% of respondents who agreed or completely agreed with the sentiment. And then it says here, almost 1 in 3 people say that if they do not see immediate results for their efforts, they usually give up and do something else. This is 32.2% say do not persist if they do not see immediate progress. A further 21.3% are ambivalent. Less than half of people indicate they would persist in the face of lack of immediate progress. That's less than half of people. And lastly, almost 1 in 4 people say they cannot accept failure if they try something and do not succeed. They can't lose. My ego will crush if I lose. I had everyone believing this empathy thing and something went wrong and now it's all on me, right? Well, 21% disagree that they can accept failure when they do not succeed. A further 16.75% were ambivalent about their ability to accept failure. That's 37.75% who have some degree of difficulty accepting losing, accepting failure. So the question really at the end of the article is, how does fear of failure prevent us from changing and studying and learning and transforming? And that's really a question for the audience, right? How does fear, how has that stopped you or impeded you from growing your organization and accepting some of these new frameworks of thinking, really, to bring into your organization? So I thought that was super interesting, really. That's really a big challenge, fear of change, as well as how they feel about themselves internally.
Yeah, I think some of it too is this sort of level of maturity, as you kind of grow. And when you're younger, you've got this ego, you're all in yourself all the time. But as you grow, the process of maturity is losing some of that ego. I think of where you see sometimes like maybe a basketball game or something, and you see the whole team cheering, but there's that one person just sitting on the bench still pouting for some reason.
Yeah.
Like something's going on there. It's like, you can't be happy for the success of your team. What just happened? You had to sit down, you had to get benched, or, something didn't go right for you. And you're so stuck in your head at that moment that you lose sight of the bigger picture. And so I think with work, a lot of times, you've got that team mentality, right? And so if you've got one person who's just, kind of dragging it down, it's like, okay, what's really going on there? Is it some sort of insecurity, some sort of inability to accept that you've gotten either snubbed or you felt like it somehow? So this is a good point for a conversation too, and to step in, because the team feels that, right? It's the team's not, if there's one person that's off, it's like that locker room isn't happy, right? And it's just one person. And
it's a deeply seated issue too. Like somehow we forgot we are part of nature. If we just observe nature, it is in constant service to itself, constantly. Everything in nature is in a constant state of giving, and it supports itself. It works, the ecosystem works constantly and forever. Now imagine something decided, I'm going to hold back. I'm not going to do it. The whole thing would collapse. But somehow as humans, we don't think when we're in a team that our inability to continuously give and to contribute will help the whole system collapse. So, and we focus on so much of what I'm missing that we forget that we are part of the bigger picture. And then sometimes what's missing is just connection and relationship and intimacy. But getting comfortable with that is scary for some people, especially if they've had some traumas or if they've had issues with trust when they were younger or what have you. And those are real problems that take tremendous effort and work to recognize in yourself and create the self-awareness that says, I have a hard time being okay with not always being okay. I have a hard time with admitting that I don't know something. For whatever reason, I created a belief way back when that I have to show up perfect and happy and joyful all the time. And it's not human. That's just not natural, right? So it's really becoming self-aware of the realization that it's okay to be human, and to also acknowledge that as part of nature, we do have an obligation to keep giving into the system. Otherwise it collapses.
The part of the reason things evolve is there's a friction, right? There's some sort of friction. And I always say, like, life, it's all this agitation machine a lot of times, right? And it's just constantly agitating. And so if you don't have that, there's no room to grow, right? So we're all here growing. We're all here getting agitated about this and that a lot of times. So if you see someone, who's struggling with that and part of your team or part of your culture, what are you going to do about it? Are you just going to let it sort of sit there, or are you going to be that cheerleader? Hey, when that person has that moment of success, you need to be there, and you need to be there with them and be that cheerleader, celebrate with them, pick them up. That's what those really good locker room guys are, the ones, who are just like, hey, we got our ass kicked today, but I saw you diving on the floor for that loose ball. I saw you, doing this and that. And you just celebrate some of those things so that, you're not becoming fractured.
Yeah. Just so don't go around slapping asses. You might get in trouble with each other.
What the challenge too, Steve, I find this is another thing too that really, and I'm sure there's an audience that could agree with this, is that there's an element of people that's deep rooted in their bias, that the moment you give encouragement, that employee is going to come ask for more. or feel like they're going to have some kind of leverage, or they're going to become too caught. And again, these are all deep-rooted biases that could be projections of that leader who that's how he came about in his leadership growth, right? Maybe he did become a little bit more cocky. Maybe he did put his employers in positions where he felt like he had leverage and had to, play a little bit of hardball. And he doesn't want to deal with, how that employer reacted to that moment, right? Because he knows, oh my gosh, karma is coming full circle, and they may come at me, for more or whatever that thing is. So maybe I'm going to hold back on encouraging. Maybe I'm going to make them feel like they're not as great as what they're doing, so they constantly feel like they're on their toes to keep their jobs. What I'm describing is a real scenario that I sort of came from, right? That was literally the mentality and the framework of thinking. And I don't think it's exclusive to one person. I think this is, again, a deep-rooted bias. So I just want to throw that out there too. That's another big issue. People are afraid to be nice because they're afraid the moment you're nice, people are going to take advantage or they're going to want more from you. And a lot of times, I don't think that was the case. It wasn't for me. The nicer the person was, the more motivated I was and more inspired I was to do great work for them. That was it. When I got that phone call that Friday, I was so inspired to go on Monday and do more. That was as simple as that.
Over the years, I've discovered that's a cultural issue. The culture of the organization can either foster that, or it can foster more empathy, more celebration. And it really comes down to the leadership exemplifying it. So, get comfortable, if you're the CEO, with admitting when something went wrong. Be the first one to say, oh my gosh, I screwed up. I need your help, team. Let's fix this, right? Be the first one to create the safe space for people to not have to show up perfect every time. And through that, then you create the ability for people to have intimacy and to celebrate each other, and to laugh about when things go wrong too. And that's part of the problem, is the culture's predicated on this punitive command and control. A lot of cultures that way. So there's no room to be human. And it's a real shame when that happens.
Yeah, I think like in the last episode, we talked about like Enron and how they had that culture of just that hyper competitive culture that just sort of pit everyone against everyone else. That doesn't mean you can't have a competitive culture and still be part of a team, right? I think Whole Foods, for example, they have different teams and the teams kind of compete a little against themselves, and then they celebrate those wins. Hey, you were the best team for this regional section for the produce department or whatever. And, you can still have some of that fun of competition, but still also be cultivating that sort of teamwork spirit that, it's so much better than having just a fragmented, everyone's these individuals, because then, you're just going to have the sum of these individuals are not going to be greater than the whole, right? So when they come together, we're going to be able to produce something that we couldn't have really done as if there was 10 of us. But when we're playing as one, we're going to be able to produce, exponentially better. And I think you see that time and time again throughout life anywhere when you're getting in those group settings. So what can we do, in a corporate and personal practices to help sort of build these cheerleaders or this emotional, support, or this empathetic, positive empathy within the environment? What comes to mind for you, Tullio?
Well, there's a few things we could do, especially in a work setting. Set up an environment where you're having a staff meeting, for example, do a check-in. Give people an opportunity to check in, whether they're, 0 to 10. Get a sense of how someone is, if they're present. If they're checking in at a low number, maybe support them. You can even do it as a team. Oh, you're checking in as a 5. What's going on? What can we do for you? Right. And also change the questions from, what did you do last week? What progress did you make? From what do you want to celebrate from last week? What do you want to celebrate moving into this week? What would be a worthy celebration for what you can accomplish this week? So it's helping the team shift into a mindset of, I am a winner. I do have reason to celebrate. I've made progress, and I'm going to make progress, and I'm going to ask for help to make that progress because I want to celebrate that next week as well. So these little things, they seem like nothing, but they change the mindset within the team of one of celebration, of one of working together as a team to succeed as a team.
Ash, what about you? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I was going to say team building events are always super cool, but separating team building, really creating environments or an event that allows employees and colleagues to really get to know each other at a deeper level, allow us to tell stories that, get to know that person, their values, and how they look at life. And once you have this type of camaraderie built into the system, having a system of encouragement. Not everyone knows how to say thank you. Some people have come from environments where they think they're owed. I know I sometimes have a hard time thanking Team Philippines when they do great things for me, because I assume once I send it off, it gets done. I don't hear from them, move on. And now I'm making an effort to say, hey, thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, JP, whoever was involved in that task. Because I have a good job of thanking people who are close to me that work within my vicinity. But sometimes when comes out to labor that's out there where I'm not seeing the person, I'm not expressing that gratitude. Well, that happens internally as well. Sometimes people just expect, well, you were supposed to do your job, so why am I thanking you for doing your job? Right? So when people have a hard time with that, having a system built in place like Bliss, like something that we have at Zero Company, where we're naturally encouraging each other through Blissbox and so on and so forth. So even if that person isn't genuinely able to say thank you, they're learning how to express gratitude until it becomes something that is natural to them because the environment is built in. And then lastly, sharing organizational goals and how we hope to achieve them from the leadership perspective. If everyone likes each other, everyone is grateful towards each other, and there's built-in gratitude into the system. Then lastly, it's listening to our leader. What is the goal that is bigger than ourselves that we're all trying to achieve together? I think all of that creates a feel-good factor that makes everyone feel good to show up to work. One, they enjoy the people they're with. Two, that everyone's grateful for each other's efforts and the efforts they put in. And lastly, we have a northern light that we're following that we believe in. I think that's the recipe, from my opinion, that create a feel-good factory.
Yeah, and I think, and that positive, that feel-good factory, that those good vibes, I think when you're the receiver, naturally, you're feeling that. Some people are uncomfortable with taking the positive, and some people are just, no, don't give it to me, I'm fine, right?
I don't want it.
But also the person who's giving it to you too, that actually, there is neurochemistry involved in how that actually helps you too, when you're not just the receiver but the giver. So it's helping both these people, and it's also proven to show that it lowers your stress levels too in this process. I mean, you can feel that when you're just sort of get it out there and make sure it's known, and instead of just hanging out there, like you said, you're not actively pursuing it. You mentioned gratitude. So I think, one of the best gratitude practices you can have is, as an individual, it's not just, what I'm grateful for, which is part of a gratitude practice. You're thinking about that, but it's also thinking about what other people did, like Tullio telling me, about that story about your job and the praise you got like that. That's actually a gratitude practice that I can extend out to thinking of, oh, wow. Yeah, let me think about Tullio and that moment he had. And that's a really powerful one, is when you can get to these stories, about people where you can just sort of sit with them. I can think about it, probably 100 of them, of great success that happened to other people. And you just make that part of your gratitude practice. You're actually going to be changing, the hard wiring in your head too, to make it a little easier, and a little, not just with yourself, but not just at work, but also with your family. I just watched Aaron Brockovich this past week. It was on, and there's a scene there that I thought of when we were thinking about this show, was near the end where they've gotten their, the ruling, and they've got this good news to go out and tell people, hey, guess how, much you're going to get here for this that can help change your lives. And Aaron Brockovich, she brings her boyfriend to go sit with that person, because just to honor like the sacrifices that this other person made. It's not just her journey, not just this other person that's going to receive this reward, but I want you to see how this changed this person's lives. So I thought that was, when we're thinking about this positive empathy, there's just that sort of thing where it's like, hey, come here and see all the, sacrifices that you've made that allowed me to climb my Mount Everest or whatever, or to, whatever your Mount Everest is. There are other people in your life right, that helped you get there, that were probably the cheerleaders there that also sacrificed and did A, B, C, D, and E for you, well, you could do this sort of thing. And letting them in on that celebration, I think that's just, that stuck out in that movie just because we were doing this podcast and I hadn't thought about that before. So guys, let's wrap it up here a little bit. So we've talked about how positive empathy, it's important to engaging, your colleagues in your workplace. We talked about how I mentioned briefly how it increases, health in a way because it's helping the person giving it and the person receiving it. Ash had all kinds of stats on just, having some sort of empathetic approach to everything you do is going to improve not just the work environment, but that potato chip to that customer, right, that we talked about there, that this positive moment of how can I make that a better experience for them. We talked about having like a gratitude practice. I think that's super important if you want to, if you're struggling with some of these issues of being able to celebrate, other people's success. So have gratitude for yourself, but work on spreading that, that loving kindness and that gratitude toward others. I think that's huge. And then, set up systems in your organization that can produce these kind of moments, those recognition moments, just so that a story can come out of that, a story that, everyone can celebrate on. So let's wrap this up. We've covered a lot today. Join us again on the next Bliss Business Podcast, where we're going to discuss building connections and culture in the age of hybrid and remote work. This is something that is certainly a work in progress for us and probably for many of you out there since the pandemic and how the workforce has changed in a lot of these businesses. There are lots of benefits to remote work, but I think company cultures are taking a hit in some ways. Regardless, if connection with your team members and customers and vendors is something you really want to improve upon, join us as we dive into this topic on the next Bliss Business Podcast.